Okay, welcome to the show. Hey everyone, my name's Martin and I'm starting a new stream here and going to be talking a little bit about Unity development and some of the things that I found in the development of my game, and I thought I'd share them with you. So we're going to talk today a little bit about shaders and some of the challenges that you may have if you are developing with universal render pipeline or high definition render pipeline compared with the built-in render pipeline in Unity sort of 2018, 2019 onwards really. And this is from a little bit of experience with sort of playing with various assets that have come off the asset store and are either bundled with the correct shaders, but that they also may be bundled with built-in shaders, or they might have other shaders that are in the package, but they haven't been linked up to the materials. And you can also get packages that are or assets that reference shaders that aren't even supplied with that asset. So a lot of people are very critical of assets on the asset store that they open it up and it's pink, the old pink shader thing. And there are some very straightforward ways to solve that, but it does require that you're familiar with what shaders are really about, how to switch them out, how to play with materials. And I just wanted to give you some understanding of at least my experience with it and how you can maybe quickly switch out materials and those sorts of things, switch out shaders. Give you a sort of firm basis of understanding of how it all works. And what I'm going to show you effectively will allow you to switch, pretty much take any asset and to some degree get it working in a different render pipeline. So that's the topic of today's stream, today's show, whatever you want to call it. So let's just start off with a quick outline of what we're talking about. So I'm not going to be talking about Unreal Engine. I'm talking specifically about Unity. And so in Unity there is a built-in render pipeline that sort of handles the presentation of the graphics effectively and deals with the special effects that get put onto the camera. So motion blur or lighting and screen space reflections, a whole lot of extra visual tools that are sort of added to the camera depending on the pipeline that you choose, and you pretty much need to build your project with a specific pipeline or one pipeline. And the one that is with Unity, comes with Unity, is called built-in render pipeline. You might call it standard, but the word standard has actually got a very specific meaning within it, so it's better to call it built-in pipeline, built-in render pipeline. And by default what you'll probably find is a lot of assets on the asset store, the Unity asset store, are built with built-in render pipeline in mind. They don't necessarily, people who sell those products or put them up for free don't always describe their product, their asset, as being built in the built-in render pipeline. They just assume that people know that it is, because that's the starting point for everybody. So the problem that has for you is if you're building a project with the universal render pipeline or the high definition render pipeline, which are the two they are more powerful render pipelines. They're programmable, definable. You can customize them to a much greater degree than you can with the built-in one. And they have a lot more control, but they have different support capabilities. Certainly at the moment they do. So the project that I'm building is for the universal render pipeline, so I'm trying to sort of plan for the future to have my game have features in it that will be supported and look good in the universal render pipeline. I am looking for support for VR, and some of the things that I want to do in VR are not necessarily supported in the high definition render pipeline, otherwise I'd perhaps be choosing that. And the reason for that is that my game is a lot of photorealistic and very high quality graphics, as high quality as I can muster with the performance attributes in mind. And I'm looking at platforms being Windows, Mac OS, the Steam Deck, Xbox, PlayStation, those sorts of platforms, not mobile, probably not iOS or Android at this point. We're really looking to try and limit it to more the high-end PCs and the console market. So with that in mind, so the Universal Render Pipeline, or URP, or URP, depending on, you might hear those terms by different YouTubers, depending on the flavour of it. The Universal Render Pipeline is the one that I've been playing with the most. I've started building my project pretty much from scratch in URP, and as I've accumulated assets from the asset store and imported them, obviously the first time you import them might be the first time that you discover they're pink, and of course they've come in with a built-in render pipeline, materials attached to them and shaders attached to them. Alternatively, you might have got an asset that actually comes out of the box as a high definition render pipeline, and of course it's going to turn out pink as well, because what pink shaders effectively means, or pink objects in the view, or part of a mesh is pink, is the fact that that particular shader that's handling the graphics presentation of that material is not going to work in the render pipeline that you're currently configured for in your project. So you get the same pink effect in an HDRP project, high definition render pipeline project. If you open up a high definition render pipeline project and you start importing built-in render shaders and materials, or URP shaders and materials, they'll look pink. So you've got to convert them to HDRP. And of course the same is the case as if you're building a built-in render pipeline project out of the box, like the normal one that you would normally do if you just create a 3D game in Unity without picking any specific render pipeline. You're going to have the built-in one. And of course if you pick up a material or a shader that is designed for Universal Render Pipeline or high definition, then it's going to be pink in the view. And it's pink, it's horrible pink, so that it stands out. It becomes very obvious what's happened. It is something that you have to fix. If you ignore it, it's going to look horrible. It might in fact make the whole view of the whole game pink, so you can't even see the character, so depending on what's in the view. So there's those three. So let me just take a sort of next foundational layer of the problem here. So a lot of people that sell assets on the asset store, they may have had them up on the asset store since very early versions of Unity. So then, I've got some assets that have been there for, God knows, 5-10 years. They were probably put up for version 1.0, and the asset itself has been fine. It's a 3D model of a castle, or a 3D model of a church, or a sword or something. And so it was probably designed with the built-in render pipeline at the time. And of course, as Unity has progressed, the new render pipelines have come in, customizable render pipelines have come in the last few versions, and it's work for the developer, the person who's created that asset, to then have to go back to their materials on their product that they're continuing to sell, and actually have to change them to be compatible with URP and HDRP. So a lot of people just don't bother. If they put up the product on the store and it's perfectly fine, they'll just leave it there, unless it's going to really cause a problem, or they've got lots of bad reviews. And I actually don't think people should be giving people bad reviews simply because they've got a built-in render pipeline asset and they haven't put up a conversion to URP or HDRP. I think it's fine that they haven't. What's really important, I think, is that they state that on their asset page, so that you know before you buy it what you're in for. So, for example, you buy a $1.99 sword on the asset store, and you bring it into your URP project or your HDRP project, and it's pink. You will need to switch the materials that are on that sword, on that 3D mesh, to use a compatible shader. So the shader is actually what's going to be doing the work to render the graphics for that, and it might be shiny, it might be matte, it might be reflective, it might be partially transparent, it might be cut out, it might have animations and sort of effects going through it, and of course those are very specific to the render pipeline that it's designed for, the shader is designed for. So the shader is the thing that's really doing the work. And the material on a sword might be metal. You might have two materials. You might have a handle that's leather strap material, and then you might have a hilt material perhaps, or you might have metal one or something like that as being the main sort of material that the sword is rendered with, so make it look shiny. But of course you don't want the handle to be shiny, so maybe if it's done well, maybe the handle, the grip is done with like a matte shader, so that it doesn't have reflections on it like the blade. So taking that just as an example, so let's just say you've got a sword, it's got two materials on it, maybe a handle, and it's got blade. And if you look at the material, you'll find the material on the blade will attach to one or more textures. Now texture is effectively an image, so it's going to be a picture which if you open up the actual texture, it'll be a two-dimensional graphic of the blade, maybe with dings and bits cut out of it, and all the detail that you would see rendered on the blade in two dimensions gets then mapped onto the surface of the 3D object via the shader. But effectively the texture isn't pink. The texture is just an image file. The material is just saying, on this 3D model, render this part with this material and the handle with this material. And where it comes into the pink shader issue is where you're saying render the handle with matte shader. And if the shader is not compatible with the render pipeline that you're in, then you get this pink horrible across the view. So the trick really with this is to go through those materials that are in that. It might only be two materials, and it might only be two textures, and it might be one or two shaders that are involved in this. So what you're really doing is you're jumping into that object, or you're jumping into the materials and saying, okay, I want to keep the material the same, I want to keep the textures that are associated with that the same, I don't want to change, I don't want to have to redraw the metal blade graphic. What I want to do is I want to switch in a compatible shader to render it as a shiny metal blade. So you might just literally switch out. For example, it might have a shader called metal shader, and that's come up pink, and you go, okay, well that shader probably doesn't work with my render pipeline that I'm in right now, so I'm going to switch that metal shader and just toggle it to something else. So you browse it in the list, and you would then pick, say, Universal Render Pipeline / lit or unlit, depending on the need. So there's a few sort of I won't call them built-in. There's a few Universal Render Pipeline shaders that come with the Universal Render Pipeline project when you first create it. I won't call them built-in because of course built-in is its own thing. And HDRP is the same. So if you create an HDRP project out of Unity from the hub, and HDRP is your chosen selection at the point where you create the project, it will actually create you a demo scene with some demo materials, with some demo textures and some shaders that are there. They're bundled with that project, and to some degree they're actually bundled into Unity as part of the so the Unity shaders as opposed to third-party shaders that you might buy on the asset store. So just going back, so we've got our sword. We would pick the metal material and toggle the shader to something that is compatible. And if you pick another shader in your shader list and it's pink as well, then that shader as well isn't compatible with the current render pipeline that you're in. So a lot of the time it's just being familiar with the list of shaders that are in your project, which ones are compatible and work in the render pipeline, which ones don't. And if you can, you want to kind of go through, create a dummy object, create a dummy material, like a plane, create a 3D plane or a cube, 3D cube, and create a material, put it on the cube, and then maybe add a texture to that, and start off with the universal render pipeline lit, which is sort of generic one. Put a texture on it so that you've got something colourful being rendered, and then just start switching out for shaders that are embedded in the project. And you'll probably find there might be 20-30 shaders in there, and you might already find, even out of the box, there might be a handful of shaders that are pink, even though you've not added them. They're just there. And if you can locate the actual shader files, you can get rid of them out of the project, delete them completely, which means they're not cluttering your project with shaders that you'll never use. And I do that frequently, so I'll go through my project and I'll do a bit of a tidy up of the shaders so that I'm not left with incompatible shaders in my list that I don't want there. I want shaders that I'm familiar with, that I know work, and keeps the list smaller, keeps the project smaller. And if you can reuse the same shaders on lots of objects, I would imagine it's going to have a better performant application than having a different shader being applied to every single object. So yeah, it's really about switching the shaders on the materials, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to retain the textures that have been associated with each of those. So if in the process of switching the shader on your sword you lose the attachment to blade metal texture or leather handle texture, you'll need to go and browse for that texture by hand and drag it back in and and put it in the shader and say, okay, this is the base color. With different render pipelines and different shaders, there are different image files that get associated with it. So typically you're going to have a base image or base color or a base thing that's going to effectively give you, a t-shirt might have like a colorful picture on it. You then might have a normal map, which will basically give you some degree of it'd be like a bluish image in your library, and that image is designed to give the shader information about effectively like a height map of how it's going to separate out those layers to look more and more realistic. So if you've got a bumpy texture on something as opposed to a flat texture, then you'd expect the normal map to be you look at the normal map, you'll be able to visually see where those high and low parts of the texture are. So a flat object isn't really going to do it, a smooth object isn't going to do it, it's going to be when it's generally a bit rough. And so you'll have a normal map. You might also have, depending on the type of shader that it is and the type of render pipeline, you might have a metallic or gloss image file that goes into either the metallic or gloss or whichever attribute is available on that shader. And that's going to effectively allow you to control or model where something is shiny and where it is not, where it's glossy and reflective, or where it's completely matte and it just absorbs the light. So why don't you just, one might think, why don't you just make the whole model shiny? Well, yeah, okay, if you're doing a shiny, a marble or a ball bearing, yeah, sure. But if you've got an object in which one aspect of it or one particular part of that model or mesh is more reflective than the other, then you're going to want to control which part of that mesh has those attributes of being reflective and which parts are matte. And that's where those image files come in, because the information in them tells the shader, when it goes more like this color, make it more shiny. When it's more like that color, make it more matte. So that gives information to the shader that allows it to render onto the 3D object where the shininess and where the glossiness is and where it's more matte. So you've got the initial the base mesh color or the base color. You might also have something called detail which can be another graphical layer to actually provide more and more detail of the image, to make it, it might be like a tree bark texture or something like that. It's really, really detailed. So you have that. So you've got your normal maps, which effectively are providing the bumpiness of the texture, so things pop out. So it's not like a flat texture. It's actually it looks, when you're looking at the microphone's probably a good example here. So you're looking at the top of the microphone. It's not completely flat and smooth there. It's got a bit of bumpiness, and you might use a normal map to sort of help model that to make it look much more 3D and much more realistic. So it's like a bump map, effectively. You've got the metal and glossiness of it, and you may also have a height map, which is like a bit like a bump map, I suppose. And the height map might allow you to pop things really out of the view and make it look much more realistic. So where I've seen that a lot is with cobblestones. And there are some shaders that are specifically designed to render very, very, photorealistic flat surfaces to make them look like they're not flat. And it's using the shader and some very clever code in there to actually provide the bump map to tell it, here's the cobblestone and here's the gap between the cobblestone that looks like it dips in. Very, very clever. And there's quite a few shaders out there that actually do this. I might do a review of them at some point, and at least the ones I've been playing with, to demonstrate their capabilities. So again, cobblestones are a great example. Cobblestones with water on them, rain or those sorts of things. And there's a whole lot of other graphics and attributes that can be added to those shaders, but typically you're going to wind up with probably a bare minimum of maybe 3, which might be the initial color map, or the initial base map, which if you look at the picture you're going to recognize what it looks like. So if it was a map of someone's face, then you're going to see the eyes and the nose and the mouth and the hair parts sort of colored in the picture, and you can recognize it because it's a face that's sort of opened up onto a flat 2D plane. And then you've got the normal map, which will be this bluish rendered version of it, where the dips and the layers sort of change, effectively like a height map. So you have a normal map, and you might have a metal or glossy map as well, which is effectively going to say, well, this part's shiny, this part's not shiny, and it will use different colors in that map to actually highlight the shininess. So if in the process of switching out those shaders you do lose the materials being attached to them, it can be a bit of a pain in the ass, because if you've got get some humanoid figures and you switch them to a different render pipeline, and you might have 30, 40, 50 materials, and on each of the materials you're going to possibly have at minimum of maybe 3 textures, being the base, the normal map, and the metal. You might have others as well. You might have ambient occlusion, AO, or you might have some other things that have to be attached. If in the process of switching the shader, it loses that, because the names of those base map underscore text, whatever, if that is inconsistent from one shader to the next, actually forget which textures were assigned. They'll still be in the project, but unless they were named sensibly, you may well have a bit of difficulty figuring out which textures went where. It'd be easy on a sword with 2 textures on 2 materials, and easy peasy. A character with lots of textures. So I've had some interesting projects with that. And my experience with that is, if you've got to decide how you're going to switch those materials out, whether you're going to in the process of testing it, keep backup copies of your project, but in the process of testing it, you may well find that you're going to lose those textures as you're switching the shader, just because of the way that those particular shaders are named and the way that they use those fields. So what I found is helpful is to actually create, let's say you're taking a built-in render pipeline model off the asset store and you're trying to convert it to URP, what you might do is you actually might create a built-in render pipeline project on the side, just a fresh one for just that asset, and you load it up and it looks fine straight out of the box in built-in render pipeline. And you run that Unity project side by side with your your other Unity instance, maybe your universal render pipeline or your high definition render pipeline. So you've got the two projects side by side. One of them's got your pink shaders all messy and the other one's nice and clean because it's coming as the built-in render pipeline. All you're doing with that one is you're looking at the materials and saying, okay, you know, the blade of that sword uses material 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as its texture on the base map. Great. Okay, go and drag that on. Oh, look, there it is. And the leather handle is using material texture called leather. Okay, I found that one. And so you're literally using the other project as a lookup reference to be able to try and see how they've mapped those textures onto those materials with the shaders. So it can be a bit laborious, but if you're looking for models for your game, and you have purchased or have downloaded or are trying out assets on the asset store, or ones that have come from somewhere else, you might have downloaded them from any number of CG Trader or any of these sort of modeling places. It's quite possible that the shader that comes with it may not be ideal for your render pipeline, and I think it's just very important to understand that it's not necessarily the author's fault that comes up pink. You need to decide your render pipeline, but you need to perhaps do some work on each of the assets as you're bringing them in, and you need to decide if that's worth it. So my suggestion to authors or content creators who are creating assets or maintaining assets on the asset store, if you're not going to create a universal render pipeline or a high definition render pipeline version of your asset, that's fine, but please update your page to just say that it is built-in only. We obviously assume that it's built-in only, but you don't know until you open it. Sometimes I actually browse through the files while they're on the asset store. One of the pages you can look at there is actually the list of files that are in the package, and I look to see whether or not there is a URP named set of files. It might sort of indicate to me that the developer has it. But a lot of the assets on the asset store, they don't actually say what render pipelines they support. A lot of them do, they'll tell you, but a lot of them don't. And the shame is that you can actually fairly easily get those pink assets that you bought that you thought were broken and busted and rubbish. You can actually get them working in your own render pipeline with a little bit of work and some knowledge, and it actually helps you understand the materials and understand what it is you're working with, and you get to choose what shaders you want to put on that and what the effects are. So the shader that you might switch out there might actually have facility for moving materials and making like a cloth animation move. It might have some very great sort of fire effects in the background that you're not going to get with any other type of shader. So the shaders really are very, very powerful. But yeah, don't beat up the asset authors that have done it. I think they need to show on the asset store what pipelines they support. I think that's important. But if you do buy an asset and it comes out in your project pink, it's the shaders that are the issue. You need to update the materials, switch the shader to a compatible shader, and make sure that the textures that were originally attached to that material are retained, or you remap them, and that's it. It should come up fine. So yeah, I will be interleaving in this video. I'll be interleaving some clips of me working through some materials here to get it to work. And I will also do some follow-up videos on debugging some of the shaders and debugging a Unity project when you've got conflicting shaders, how to edit some of the shaders. Some of the shaders are editable, some are less editable, some are not editable at all, and there are different shader editors out there that will actually allow you to build or enhance or fix shaders that may have been bundled with assets, or you've purchased them and they're just not quite working quite well. And it's it's not necessarily programming, but I think a little bit of understanding about how they're structured and how they're constructed to actually do the rendering onto the graphics of the game. I think that's important to have a good understanding, because just plonking assets into a scene, you're never going to really get it looking really good unless you understand what those shaders are going to be doing in the background, how they work, and at least at a superficial level. So anyway, so that's what I wanted to sort of share with you is my experience with the horrible pink shaders. I did a lot of Googling when I first hit that issue. I found there's a few articles that gave me the answer I was looking for, but I couldn't really find a good solid YouTube video that kind of walked through step by step with a generic enough explanation of how to switch those out. So I hope that's been of some use. I will continue to provide content of this nature as I'm developing my game, and we'll be talking about a whole lot of learnings that come out of using Unity, and good and bad, and hopefully try and save you some time and effort. Thank you for watching. Sorry it's been a long video, but obviously I'd like to be thorough with these things and make sure that I get the message across. So yeah, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and hit the like, and tell your friends. Okay, see you next time. Bye.